The scent of Lagos was a sharp, unrelenting insult, a relentless war waged between conflicting demands on the senses. The raw sewage battling with exhaust fumes, the metallic tang of sweat vying with the sweet, heavy rot of overripe mangoes. Yet, to Ijeoma, this brutal cocktail smelled like opportunity, a volatile promise she clung to like a desperate prayer. Her stall, tucked strategically but humbly between a loud, abrasive pepper cellar and a chaotic repair shop in Tejuosho Market, was barely a space, a dark, cramped corner where she miraculously coaxed silk and cotton into fleeting masterpieces. Ijeoma was a tailor, but to call her merely a tailor was to mistake the artist for the paint. She was an architect of illusion, a creator of the dresses women would risk their rents, their marriages, and their pride for. She possessed a striking beauty that was both a currency and a profound burden. Her skin held the deep, flawless sheen of polished mahogany. Her eyes, wide and intelligently observing, held the constant, burning plea of a young woman desperate for the kind of escape that only true wealth provides. This radiant external perfection was her ultimate contrast frame, the single piece of inherited luxury set starkly against the grim, persistent reality of her mother's shack, where the rain always found a cold, persistent way through the corrugated iron roof, no matter how many pots they placed to catch it. Her fingers, long, slender, and preternaturally nimble, moved with the precision of a surgeon, darting the ancient silver needle through velvet and lace, building the gowns that would grace the city's most exclusive, glittering parties. She was the best-kept secret of the market, the girl who could turn rags into dreams for others, yet still slept every night on a threadbare mat, her own future stitched together with thin air. Her mother, Ijeoma, saw Ijeoma's beauty as a dangerous liability. "It is a hook for hungry men, Ijeoma, not a ladder to climb out," she would rasp, her own hands permanently swollen, stained, and scarred from years of scrubbing the stiff, heavily starched laundry for the very same privileged women Ijeoma now dressed. That morning, the incessant background noise of the market, the rhythmic, forceful clanging of a blacksmith's hammer, the shouted negotiations, the tinny, aggressive gospel music blasting from a nearby speaker, was violently interrupted by the arrival of Ngozi. Ngozi was Ijeoma's direct, better-funded competition, a woman whose success was built not on genuine talent, but on sheer, cold calculation, inherited wealth, and a fully funded, glass-fronted boutique a few blocks away. Ngozi strode past Ijeoma's humble corner, her movements deliberate, her laughter too loud, dressed in an immaculate, structured suit Ijeoma herself would have killed to have the resources to design. Ngozi paused directly in front of Ijeoma's work table, her eyes carefully not meeting Ijeoma's, but focused instead on the piece of faded lace Ijeoma was meticulously mending. "Still stitching patches, Ijeoma?" Ngozi's voice, a smooth, cruel velvet, cut through the market's chaos with surgical precision. "I am scouting for a third-rate seamstress for my new ready-to-wear line. Low pay, brutally long hours, but at least you'll be out of this gutter." The heat rose sharply in Ijeoma's neck, a familiar, humiliating burn of impotent rage. She didn't grant Ngozi the dignity of meeting her gaze, focusing instead on the exacting demands of the lace. "My clients pay 3 times what your tailor charges, Ngozi. They just prefer discretion." Ngozi scoffed, bending low until her expensive perfume, a sharp, cloying counterpoint to the organic market stench, dominated the air. Discretion? Or is it simply desperation? When you are finally ready to sow more than cheap dreams and lies, call me. Your talent is merely a gorgeous car with a completely dead engine, darling. It looks spectacular, but it goes absolutely nowhere, and everyone knows it. She straightened, her expensive shadow momentarily eclipsing the small, precious square of sunlight that was Ijeoma's entire workspace, before she clicked away, the sound of her costly heels echoing like a final, absolute funeral march for Ijeoma's ambitions. The insult landed not on her craftsmanship, but on her truth. Ijeoma was utterly stuck. She had the skill, the intense, blazing fire, and the tireless drive, but she critically lacked the one thing that truly mattered in Lagos: the leverage, the massive capital, the aggressive, unearned recognition. Ngozi's words were the echo of a constant, grinding struggle. Talent alone was simply not enough in this hyper-competitive city. A girl needed an unnatural spark, a catastrophic break, something absolutely forbidden to finally leap over the insurmountable barriers of poverty and contempt. As her hand, trembling with a mixture of fury and weariness, reached for her most valuable possession, her favorite, oldest sewing needle, the tiny tarnished silver point she'd inherited from her grandmother, a wave of deep, bone-aching exhaustion washed over her. This needle, a supposed family heirloom, felt unnaturally cold, heavy, and utterly useless. It was a tool of back-breaking, honest labor, not of the swift, powerful transformation she craved. It was then, as she accidentally pricked her finger on the sharp, ancient silver point, drawing a single tiny bead of crimson blood, that the air around her stall grew strangely, impossibly still. The chaotic market noises seemed to fade into a muffled, distant hum, replaced by an unnatural, sterile silence. She felt a profound and unsettling presence, an unnatural cool in the suffocating Lagos heat, and the silver needle in her hand began to pulse violently, catching the dim light not with the dullness of old silver, but with a deep, unsettling indigo glow. The forbidden hook was set. The needle was now resting on a square of black velvet she used for fittings, and its silver surface was suddenly etched with lines that hadn't been visible seconds ago, symbols that curled and writhed like tiny, sleeping serpents demanding attention. A voice, low, resonant, yet devoid of any true human warmth, brushed chillingly against the edges of her mind, speaking not through her ears, but directly into the core of her desperation. "You pricked yourself, daughter of ambition. A debt has been formally registered." This was the moment of no return. The silence persisted, a heavy velvet shroud drawn over the noise of Tejuosho Market. Amma stood frozen, her bloodied fingertip throbbing, staring into the heart of the indigo light radiating from the ancient needle. It was a choice presented in the most brutal, direct terms. Honest, back-breaking poverty that would eventually claim her body and spirit, or instant, transformative success that demanded only her reflection. Her memory flashed back to her mother Ijeoma, the exhaustion etched into every line of her face, the quiet shame of the landlord's monthly threat, the crushing knowledge that she, Amma, the beautiful and talented daughter, was still failing to save them. Ngozi's mocking, confident stride seemed to echo in the spectral quiet. The decision, when it came, was not born of greed, but of a fierce, desperate survival instinct. She was choosing the weapon of transformation over the slow, agonizing death of stagnation. "I accept," Amma whispered, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "But how do I know this is real? That the price will not be too high." The voice, still low and devoid of location, swelled with a quiet, undeniable authority. "The price is always proportional to the ambition, Amma. You aspire to conquer Lagos, to become an icon of fashion, a climb that requires supernatural leverage. Every stitch you make with this needle, every garment that achieves true, unprecedented success, will draw energy from your most prized possession, the vessel you value above all else, your face. It will be the cost of the charm. You will know it is real when you see the results, and when you see the small, creeping changes in the mirror. It is a one-way path, daughter of Lagos. There is no refund, no return, and breaking the terms means total forfeiture." The needle dropped suddenly into her palm, no longer glowing indigo, but cold, heavy, and brilliantly polished silver. All the ancient serpentine etchings were gone, replaced by a clean, almost intimidating shine. The market noise rushed back in, the clang, the shout, the music, like a great wave washing over the quiet corner. Amma slipped the needle into its usual velvet sheath, her heart still galloping, but underneath the fear, a dangerous excitement was blossoming, thick and intoxicating. She knew she had made a pact with the shadow, but she rationalized it instantly. "I will only use it until my mother is safe. Just one big break." The break came faster than she could have imagined. Her next client was Dami, a notoriously fickle socialite who regularly paid exorbitant fees for gowns only to reject them at the last minute. Dami's latest demand was a gown for the prestigious Diamond Gala, a dress that had to be the absolute highlight of the night, a work of art that defied gravity and definition. Amma took the measurements, sketching nervously, the task feeling impossible, overwhelming. The moment she pulled the new, bright silver needle from its sheath and guided it into the expensive, fragile silk, something shifted in her. Her concentration became absolute. Her hands moved with flawless, inhuman speed, and a cold, focused clarity settled over her mind, washing away doubt and fatigue. She worked through the night, the sewing machine humming a hypnotic, tireless rhythm. Every stitch, every bead placed, every fold of fabric seemed to respond to a will beyond her own. The gown was no longer just fabric. It was a living sculpture, an architectural marvel that spoke of effortless, unparalleled luxury. When Dami arrived for the final fitting 2 days later, she was instantly mesmerized. She didn't examine the fit critically, or point out minor flaws, as was her custom. She simply stood before the mirror in silent awe. "Amma," Dami breathed, touching the silk reverently. This is more than a dress. It is a throne. How did you do this?" Dami handed over the full payment, 4 times Amma's usual rate, and immediately commissioned 3 more pieces. The monetary success was instantaneous and staggering. Amma held the thick bundle of clean, crisp notes, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the realization of power. That night, she paid off all her mother's outstanding debts. Later, in the privacy of their shack, with the light of a single kerosene lamp flickering against the dusty mirror, Amma studied her reflection. She looked radiant, successful, even more beautiful than before, flushed with triumph. But as she leaned closer, chasing the flicker of the lamp, she saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow beneath her left eye, where the skin was usually tight and flawless. It was no dark circle. It was a subtle, almost ghostly blurring of the perfect line of her orbital bone. It was so minute she could rationalize it away as fatigue, but a chill ran down her spine. The covenant was already consuming its collateral. The success was real, and so was the cost. She touched the spot with her finger, the joy of the money briefly extinguished by a sharp, cold dread. The needle lay on the table, silent and gleaming, waiting for the next ambition. She had bought her freedom, but she had leased her identity. The road had just started, and she had already paid the first toll. The bundles of cash from Dami's commissions were merely the first tremor before the earthquake of Amma's success. Within 3 months, the suffocating heat and perpetual smell of decay in her mother's shack were distant, fading memories. Amma moved them not just out of the shack, but across the city to a clean, quiet duplex in a neighborhood that required a security guard and a code for entry. The move was a definitive, aggressive severing of her past, a physical manifestation of the covenant's power. Ijeoma, bewildered and tearful, clung to her daughter, simultaneously proud of the escape and deeply, chillingly uneasy about the unnatural speed of this prosperity. She would often stand in the pristine kitchen, running her hand over the cold, smooth granite counter, murmuring, "This is too much, Amma. This speed. It leaves no time for God." Amma, however, was already too far gone, too intoxicated by the sudden, absolute power she wielded. She rationalized her mother's fear as the typical reluctance of the impoverished to accept good fortune. Her next move was the opening of House of Covenant, a boutique in the heart of Victoria Island, ironically named in her private thoughts, but publicly presented as a testament to hard work and divine favor. The shop was a minimalist vision of concrete and glass, a deliberate contrast to the chaos of Tejuosho. She stopped calling herself a tailor. She was now Amma Ijeoma, the designer, known for gowns that seemed to predict fashion trends before they materialized. Her clientele expanded exponentially, spanning politicians' wives, celebrated musicians, and the city's true social royalty. Every creation was touched by the silver needle, and every client who wore an Amma Ijeoma piece instantly became the magnetic focal point of any room they entered. The inevitable friction came from Ngozi, who watched the rise of her rival with a toxic blend of disbelief and mounting corrosive jealousy. Ngozi's boutique, once the pinnacle of Lagos fashion, suddenly felt dated, tired, and aggressively dull by comparison. Ngozi tried to spread rumors, whispering about juju and dark arts to mutual clients, but Amma's success was too loud, too visible, too beautiful to be easily dismissed. The gowns spoke for themselves. The confrontation climaxed at the planning meeting for the Golden Spool, the most prestigious annual fashion event in West Africa. Ngozi was slated to present the opening collection. Ijeoma was only offered a minor closing slot. "You've bought the building, Ijeoma, but you haven't bought the industry," Ngozi sneered during a heated organizational debate, loud enough for the powerful fashion committee members to hear. "Talentless upstarts are a dime a dozen. You have no history, no foundation. You will always be that dirty girl from Tejuosho who got lucky." The insult, delivered with public, cutting malice, stripped away Ijeoma's carefully constructed composure. It triggered a deep, reckless urge to prove her power, not just to the committee, but to the needle itself. She would use the covenant to create a masterpiece so legendary, so breathtaking, that Ngozi would be instantly and permanently irrelevant. Ijeoma returned to her studio that night and pulled out the ancient silver needle. This time she didn't just stitch. She poured every ounce of her ambition, her rage, and her desperate need for validation into the design. The gown, meant for a celebrity model for the Golden Spool preview show, was a structure of impossible lace and spun gold, a dress that demanded attention, a garment of pure, irresistible charm. It was the deepest plunge she had yet taken into the Pact, demanding maximum leverage. When the dress was finished, a marvel that shone under the studio lights with an internal ethereal glow, Ijeoma looked in the mirror, searching for the cost. It was no longer a shadow. It was a subtle but definite stiffness in the lower part of her face, especially around her mouth. When she tried to smile genuinely, the muscles seemed to resist, pulling her expression into a slightly fixed, unnaturally smooth, almost doll-like mask. The genuine warmth was gone, replaced by a perfect, untouchable polish. The contrast was horrifying. Her professional life, built on fluidity and grace, was succeeding while her personal expression was becoming rigid and static. She quickly dismissed the change, blaming the long nights, the stress of the Ngozi drama, and the fierce competition. "It's stress," she told herself, touching the smooth, cold perfection of her cheekbone. "Just need rest." But the voice that only she could hear, whispered, "Debt-registered, daughter of pride. Charm is working." The preview show for the Golden Spool was not merely a success. It was a sensory riot, a fever dream of luxury and obsession. The celebrity model, draped in Ijeoma's recklessly conceived lace and spun gold creation, stepped onto the Lagos runway and caused an immediate, visible tremor in the audience. The charm was overwhelming, the supernatural current flooding the room. People didn't just admire the gown. They stared at it with an unnatural, hungry fixation, their eyes glued to the dress with a singular intensity that verged on mania. Whispers of genius and masterpiece were eclipsed by a profound, inexplicable sense of need. Guests surged forward, phones flashing, their desire to possess a piece of that power almost palpable. Ijeoma watched from the wings, the roar of the crowd washing over her like a tidal wave of affirmation, the ultimate high. She felt untouchable, completely vindicated. Ngozi, positioned prominently in the front row, could barely contain her venom. During the chaotic final walk, she executed her pre-planned sabotage. She accidentally spilled a full glass of deep red wine onto the train of Ijeoma's gold gown. It was a public, deliberate, and cruel act designed to ruin the moment and the dress. But the magic of the covenant was too potent. The moment the wine hit the enchanted fabric, instead of staining the delicate lace, it seemed to shimmer for a split second, and then the dark liquid flowed off the train, sliding onto the polished wood floor without leaving a single trace. The crowd gasped, not in horror, but in stunned reverence, interpreting the event as a theatrical miracle, a divine endorsement of Ijeoma's genius. Ngozi watched, her mouth agape, the ruined wine glass shaking in her hand, the sudden public failure etching a deep line of disbelief and defeat onto her face. Her desperate act had only served to mythologize Ijeoma further. The next morning, the city's newspapers were dominated by the event. "The dress that could not be stained," screamed one headline. Ijeoma, Lagos's fashion oracle," declared another. The deluge of orders was instantaneous and paralyzing. Ijeoma had won the battle, and within 48 hours, The official gilded invitation to present a full collection at the main Golden Spool competition arrived, sealing her status as the reigning prodigy. Yet, every victory brought a chilling new price. As she glanced at the photos splashed across the magazine covers, photos capturing her moment of triumph, she saw the escalating disfiguration. The stiffness around her mouth was now definitive, permanent, turning her public smiles into beautiful but utterly hollow masks. The character lines, the faint, natural creases around her eyes that spoke of genuine laughter and fleeting sadness, had been aggressively smoothed away. Her face was achieving a terrifying, unblemished symmetry, a porcelain perfection that hinted not at youth, but at a lack of internal life. The contrast frame was now fully established. The world saw flawless, radiant triumph. Ijeoma saw a beautiful forgery, an identity slowly being sanded away. She began actively avoiding mirrors, depending instead on the reflection she saw in the eyes of her customers and the breathless articles written about her. The sight of her own unmoving, perfect image caused a brief, sharp stab of panic she could no longer afford to feel. She had to focus on the work, on the next stitch, on the ultimate goal. It was during a fitting with a high-profile art curator, a man named Jide, that her focus wavered. Jide was an unexpected figure in her fast-paced world. Quiet, perceptive, possessed of an unnerving gaze that seemed to pierce straight through the glamour. As Ijeoma adjusted the hem of his fiancée's gown, Jide's eyes settled on her, not with the usual lust or transactional admiration she was accustomed to, but with a deep, unsettling curiosity. "You, Ijeoma," he said, his voice low, measured, and completely detached from the usual flattery. "You have achieved everything so quickly. But I look at you and I see a masterpiece that is still being finished. You look like a woman who is afraid to blink, afraid the canvas will crack." His observation struck her with the cold precision of the silver needle itself. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Everyone else saw the radiant success. Jide saw the fear beneath the porcelain mask. He represented a sudden, dangerous variable, a connection based not on the product of the charm, but on a genuine, unsettling perception of her true, burdened self. For the first time since the bargain, Ijeoma felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten. The fragile, dangerous possibility of human connection, a vulnerability that the covenant explicitly forbade. This meeting, brief as it was, served as a potent warning. A new kind of temptation had arrived in her life, a potential path to her downfall. The introduction of Jide into Ijeoma's meticulously controlled life was an immediate and catastrophic rupture in the fabric of the covenant. He represented the forbidden vulnerability, a truth-seeking presence that destabilized the foundation of her success. She began seeking him out, initially under the pretense of discussing the fusion of fashion and West African contemporary art, the very subject of his curatorial expertise. Their meetings started in neutral public galleries, but soon shifted to quiet, sun-drenched cafes, places far removed from the screaming ambition of the fashion world. Jide spoke of texture and narrative, of the necessary flaws that gave a work its soul. His words resonated with a deep, unsettling honesty that Ijeoma's world of superficial glamour had long suppressed. When he looked at her, he did not see the dazzling, untouchable designer. He saw the guarded young woman from the market, and he seemed to be deliberately chipping away at the beautiful, hard facade she had built. Ijeoma found herself dangerously drawn to the fragile, forgotten sensation of being seen, truly seen, without the influence of the cursed needle. She laughed around him, a genuine, unguarded sound that felt unfamiliar to her own ears. But every time Jide made her smile, a cold, sharp echo of the Pact resonated in her mind, and she felt the physical tightening of her facial muscles. The cost of the covenant was no longer merely about smoothing away the lines of character. It had deepened into a horrifying form of perfection. Her reflection in any polished surface now displayed a cold, preternatural symmetry. Her skin was exquisitely flawless, her features perfectly proportioned, yet the image staring back at her was utterly incapable of showing empathy, fear, or genuine warmth. It was the face of a beautiful statue, perfect, cold, and emotionally paralyzed. This intensified the contrast frame. The world saw an artist who had achieved a divine, untouchable beauty. Ijeoma saw the proof that her soul was being systematically extracted, leaving behind a magnificent but empty shell. Jide, unaware of the literal price Ijeoma was paying, often remarked on her serene, almost regal composure. "You hold yourself like a queen, Ijeoma," he once observed, reaching out to gently brush a stray piece of thread from her shoulder. "You have this incredible stillness. But I wonder, what are you hiding behind that perfect mask?" The touch, so simple and human, sent a jolt of panic through her, confirming the violation of the covenant. She was seeking solace, and her heart was dangerously close to giving way to love. Meanwhile, Ngozi, reeling from her public humiliation at the preview show, had not retreated. Instead, she had shifted her focus from public sabotage to obsessive surveillance. Ngozi was a predator who smelled weakness, and she saw the tiny, almost imperceptible cracks in Ijeoma's armor. The slight distraction during fittings, the unexpected softness in her eyes when she took a certain phone call, the occasional, almost terrified pause before Ijeoma touched her famous silver needle. Ngozi correctly surmised that Ijeoma's success was dependent on a singular powerful force, and that any chink in Ijeoma's personal life might be the key to destroying it. She hired a relentless private investigator, instructing him to follow Ijeoma's every move, looking for the forbidden, the unnatural, the secret source of her power. Ngozi knew Ijeoma's work was flawless, but she was now targeting Ijeoma's humanity, the only area where she might still be vulnerable. The pressure mounted as the date for the Golden Spool main event approached. Ijeoma needed a final, undisputed triumph to solidify her status, a collection that would silence every critic and eclipse every past success. She stood in her immaculate studio, reaching for the needle to begin the centerpiece gown. As her fingers closed around the cold silver, she expected the usual rush of clarity and power. Instead, she felt a profound, chilling resistance. The needle felt heavy, its light dull, almost resentful. The power was there, but it was sullen, as if acknowledging the betrayal of her growing connection with Jide. The spiritual husband's presence, dormant since the initial bargain, seemed to hover, quiet but watchful. "The charm will work, Ijeoma," the silent voice echoed in the absence of sound, "but the next debt will be crippling." She was using the forbidden covenant while actively pursuing the forbidden connection. The risk was no longer just about losing her face. It was about losing everything simultaneously. She plunged the needle into the silk regardless, accepting the monumental gamble. The Golden Spool was 3 days away. Ijeoma lived in a state of suspended terror, working around the clock, the silver needle a cold, electric extension of her own will. The centerpiece dress was taking shape, an insane assembly of mirrored sequins and deep indigo fabric that looked like captured midnight. The work demanded an unprecedented surge of power from the covenant, forcing Ijeoma to rely on the charm with a reckless desperation. This intense application of the forbidden power created a deep, resonant hum in her studio, a sound only she could perceive, which felt like the earth itself vibrating beneath her feet. Every stitch amplified the contrast frame. The gown was a blinding spectacle of public glory, while the woman creating it was rapidly deteriorating into a private horror. The cost was paid immediately, aggressively. When Ijeoma finally dared to examine her reflection, she found that the remaining subtle contours of her face, the gentle flare of her nostrils, the soft curve of her chin, had been flattened into a terrifying polished uniformity. The smoothness had moved beyond porcelain to resemble highly polished, dark stone. Her eyes, once pools of expressive vulnerability, were now the most shocking feature, perfectly shaped, wide, and brilliantly reflective, but fixed in a perpetual terrifying stare. She looked not like a human, but like a flawless, exquisitely crafted mask of herself, incapable of expressing any emotion that contradicted the veneer of success. The human warmth that had captivated Jide was almost entirely gone, replaced by an unnerving, symmetrical beauty that was cold to the touch. In a fit of panicked reaction, Ijeoma called Jide, needing to anchor herself to something real, something outside the suffocating grip of the Pact. She didn't dare meet him in person, fearing what he would see. Instead, she asked him to meet her at a remote, secluded art installation on the outskirts of the city, citing creative burnout and the pressure of the show. Jide, ever perceptive, noticed the frantic edge in her voice, but agreed instantly. This move was a fatal error, a direct breach of the Covenant's core demand. Never seek solace, never show despair, never seek love. The spiritual entity, which had been sullenly observing, now acted. The moment Ijeoma hung up the phone, the silver needle on her table vibrated violently, flying across the room and embedding itself, point first, into the gilded frame of a fashion sketch. The invisible presence of the spirit was suddenly, suffocatingly physical, filling the studio with the scent of stagnant water and ozone. "You defy the contract, daughter of pride," the silent voice boomed in her mind, laced now with lethal fury. "You seek the flawed warmth of mortal love to circumvent your debt. The bargain is simple. You have the power, I take the self. You wish for the heart of a man, an anchor of comfort. Very well. I will ensure that the object of your affection sees only the escalating price, the horror you become." At the same time, miles away, Ngozi's private investigator, a scrawny, persistent man named Chuka, finally delivered his findings. Chuka hadn't discovered the needle, but he had tracked Ijeoma's movements for weeks, meticulously documenting her trips to the old, abandoned corner of Tejuosho Market every few months. A strange, pointless ritual for a woman who lived in Victoria Island. More critically, he presented Ngozi with a stack of photographs. Ijeoma and Jide, laughing, sharing intimate conversation, their body language undeniably affectionate, a clear, dangerous weakness in the impenetrable facade of the designer. Ngozi's face twisted into a triumphant, predatory smile. Ijeoma's emotional life was the weak link, the forbidden component she could exploit. Ngozi understood ambition, and she knew that the greatest threat to a highly successful person is not professional failure, but personal, public shame. She decided to use the Jide connection, and the truth about Ijeoma's past, as a bomb to detonate at the Golden Spool. Ijeoma, blinded by her fear and her desperate need for Jide's affirmation, continued to focus only on the grand show. The final, spectacular gown was ready, awaiting its model. She looked again at her reflection, noticing one last, terrifying detail. The color in her eyes, once a rich, deep brown, was leaching away, replaced by a strange, reflective opacity that made them look like perfect, highly polished glass marbles. The transformation was complete. She was a work of art that was no longer human. Section 7. The art installation was a jarring departure from Lagos's relentless energy. A desolate, wind-swept clearing where massive, rusted metal sculptures jutted out of the earth like skeletal warnings. The isolation was meant to offer Ijeoma solace, but it only amplified her terror. She stood before a massive arch of twisted iron, waiting for Jide, feeling utterly exposed. This meeting was the final precipice. She needed to unburden herself, to confess the bargain, to find an antidote in his humanity. Yet, the moment she saw Jide walking toward her, her resolve shattered. She dreaded the moment his perceptive eyes would land on her face, realizing the terrible contrast between the radiant designer and the cold, unmoving mask she had become. Jide approached her with his usual quiet intensity, his concern immediately visible in his guarded eyes. "Ijeoma, you sound distressed. What is truly happening? The closer you get to the Golden Spool, the more you retreat." He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently cup his hands near her cheek, as if assessing the temperature of the stone she resembled. Ijeoma tried to speak, tried to force the words. "I made a mistake. I sold my face. I can't feel any more," past her rigid lips. The effort was immense. Her mouth, fixed by the covenant, resisted the complex emotional choreography required for confession. The words that emerged were flat, toneless, devoid of the panic she felt inside. "The pressure is immense. I need to focus. I shouldn't be here." Jide frowned, his gaze deepening. He saw the cold, perfect symmetry, yes, but he also saw the desperate, trapped expression in her eyes. The only part of her face the charm had not fully claimed, the internal self screaming for release. "Stop, Ijeoma. Don't dismiss me with these perfect, empty excuses. I don't care about the collection. I care about you." He took a step closer, breaking the sacred distance Ijeoma had maintained since the bargain. His voice dropped to a near whisper, filled with a sincere, vulnerable warmth. I have fallen in love with you, Ama Ijeoma. Not the designer, not the fame, but the wounded woman hiding beneath all this silk and perfection. Let me help you carry whatever weight you are bearing. The words, I have fallen in love with you, landed on Ama like a physical blow, the final, unforgivable violation of the spiritual covenant. She had actively received solace. She had allowed true love to blossom. The spiritual response was instantaneous and agonizing. A white-hot blade of pain ripped through the left side of her face, starting at her temple and slicing down to her jaw. Ama gasped, clutching her cheek. The world tilted violently. In the brief, terrifying flash of pain, she saw her reflection in the polished metal of the sculpture beside her, but it was no longer the flawless mask. For one sickening moment, she saw the true immediate price. A face partially stripped of skin, a grotesque, pulpy distortion of bone and flesh. It was a terrifying glimpse of the total forfeiture promised. The spiritual husband's silent voice roared in her mind, 1,000 times louder than before. You broke the vow. You embraced the forbidden emotion. The price is due, and I will claim it publicly. Driven by sheer, animalistic terror, Ama recoiled from Jide as if he were a serpent. She couldn't explain, she couldn't stay. She backed away, shaking her head. The image of the stripped face burned onto her retina. No, I can't. This is wrong. You don't understand. She turned and ran, sprinting blindly away from the clearing, away from Jide's horrified, confused calls, away from the terrifying metal sculptures that now seemed to close in on her like witnesses. She was fleeing the love that had betrayed her, fleeing the price that was now actively hunting her. Ama ran until her lungs burned, crossing the overgrown path back toward the road. It was here, in her moment of raw, terrified flight, that she collided violently with a dark figure lurking behind a thicket of scrub, Ngozi's private investigator Chuka. He dropped his expensive camera, scattering its contents onto the dirt. Ama didn't pause. She pushed past him, her sole focus on escaping the presence of the spiritual husband. Chuka scrambled to gather his camera, his eyes widening as he saw the single photograph that had slipped out, the final piece of evidence he needed. A clear, close-up shot of Ama, her face twisted in terror and pain, the perfect porcelain mask briefly cracked by the physical agony, revealing a glimpse of the horrifying rigidity beneath. The spy grinned, tucking the photo safely into his pocket. He now had the ammunition to destroy both Ama's professional career and her personal life at the Golden Spool. Section 8. The air backstage at the Golden Spool event was a suffocating mix of expensive hairspray, adrenaline, and desperate ambition. But for Ama, the metallic tang of fear dominated everything. She was a ghost moving through the organized chaos, her perfect, expressionless face failing to hide the terror screaming in her reflective eyes. The final spectacular gown, the mirrored sequins and indigo silk creation, hung like a sentinel in her dressing room, emanating a cold, resonant power. Ama was clinging to the belief that the Covenant's power, although unstable, could deliver one last, undisputed triumph. If I win this, if I reach the absolute peak, I can break the hold, I can pay the debt and be free, she frantically rationalized, despite the searing memory of the pain Jide's words had triggered. She was now acting on pure, desperate momentum. Ngozi, however, was already moving, executing her final, calculated plot. She didn't want a simple win. She wanted Ama's total, public annihilation. Ngozi had carefully seeded gossip among the models about Ama's bizarre behavior and the unnerving feel of her clothes. She had also ensured the lighting director received a significant bribe to use specialized high-intensity spotlights for Ama's final segment. Lights designed to expose every flaw, every line, every textural imperfection. Ngozi wanted the world to see the grotesque truth, hidden beneath the layers of flawless makeup and magical charm. The first crack in Ama's final performance came when the supermodel assigned to the centerpiece gown, a woman known for her icy professionalism, walked into the dressing room. The model, whose name was Lena, stared at the shimmering, impossible garment, then looked directly at Ama's unnaturally still face. Lena was from the market, too, and she understood the dangerous language of things that were too beautiful to be real. "Ma'am," Lena said, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper, "I can't wear this. Feels heavy, cold. It doesn't want to be worn by a human." She was looking past the glamour and into the garment's dark core. Her refusal was the ultimate professional insult, an external validation of the cursed power Ijeoma wielded. The fear that radiated from Lena was so genuine, so raw, that it broke through Ijeoma's haze of denial. With Lena gone, and only minutes remaining before her closing sequence, Ijeoma had no choice. She was the only one who could handle the garment's supernatural weight and power. She was part of the pact, part of the debt. She quickly stripped, her body trembling, and slipped into the magnificent, terrifying indigo gown. The cold silk settled around her like a second skin, heavier than any fabric should be, and the rush of forbidden power was instantly overwhelming, a dizzying electric high that made the pain in her jaw recede. The dress was designed for a goddess, and the perfect frozen woman who wore it was now indistinguishable from the artifact itself. This was the ultimate contrast frame, the designer performing her own flawless success, becoming the magnificent symbol of the very thing that was destroying her. But the plan was not hers anymore. Ngozi's insidious setup was about to take hold. The show announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, introducing the designer who had rewritten the rules of Lagos haute couture. Ijeoma, clad in the impossible gown, her face a terrifying symmetrical mask of dark stone, moved to the edge of the curtain. She took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the dry, metallic air of the stage, and pushed through the velvet drape, stepping out into the blinding, annihilating glare of Ngozi's preset spotlights. The collective gasp from the audience was not one of admiration, but of stunned, horrified realization. The charm was still working. The gown was impossibly beautiful, magnetic, and overwhelming, but the lights, amplified by Ngozi's subtle manipulation, exposed the cold, horrifying perfection of Ijeoma's face. The porcelain mask, the glass-like eyes, the total absence of human warmth beneath the perfect makeup. It was all suddenly, starkly visible, a chilling monument to success purchased at a terrible price. As Ijeoma began the slow, regal walk down the runway, forcing herself not to falter under the silent, judging stare of thousands, her eyes scanned the prestigious front row. There, seated directly across from her, was Ngozi, leaning forward with a predatory, triumphant smirk, her eyes fixed not on the gown, but on Ijeoma's ruined face. And next to her, pale and shocked, was Jide. He was staring at her with an expression of profound, heartbroken understanding, the realization that his love had not only failed to save her, but had perhaps sealed her grotesque transformation. Ijeoma had chosen the stage over salvation, and now she was trapped between the witness and the executioner, the forbidden garment pulling her toward her catastrophic final moment. Section 9. Ijeoma continued her walk down the runway, but it was no longer a display of triumph. It was a slow, agonizing descent into exposure. The initial gasp from the audience gave way to a chilling silence, punctuated by the frenetic clicking of cameras trying to capture the grotesque beauty of her frozen features under the high-intensity lights. She moved with the unnatural, gliding perfection of a wind-up doll, the magnificent indigo gown pulling her forward like a dark, irresistible current. The contrast was complete. The perfection of the garment screamed of divine genius, while the silent horror of the woman wearing it testified to a terrible, unnatural pact. Her eyes, those terrifying pools of glass, were fixed solely on Jide, who remained rooted to his seat, his features a mask of devastating grief and accusation. Then came the final, brutal blow orchestrated by Ngozi. Just as Ijeoma reached the end of the runway, preparing to turn, the massive digital backdrop behind her, the screen that usually displayed ethereal brand logos, flickered violently. It was instantly replaced by Ngozi's projected truth, a gallery of unflattering, devastating images. First, the private investigator's final shot. A large, chilling portrait of Ijeoma's face twisted in silent agony and fear, the flawless makeup cracked by the supernatural pain from the day before, showing the rigidity beneath. This was immediately followed by old, grainy photos of her cramped stall in Tejuosho Market, a damning record of her dirt and poverty. A collective roar erupted from the audience, not of applause but of shocked, cruel realization and cynical mockery. The media surged forward, recognizing the scandalous narrative. The lauded genius was a fraud, a desperate market tailor who had acquired her success by mysterious, perhaps unholy means. The public shame was instantaneous, total, and irreversible. In that moment of absolute exposure, the spiritual entity, the water spirit bound to the needle, made its final claim. The power that had sustained the illusion, the charm that had kept the garment irresistible, abruptly failed. The magnificent indigo gown, which had shimmered with internal light seconds before, instantly lost its ethereal quality. The mirrored sequins suddenly looked dull, cheap, and ordinary under the harsh spotlights. The structure sagged, the lace seemed to wither, and the entire garment appeared weary, heavy, and unremarkable, a mere dress stripped of its forbidden current. Ijeoma felt a sudden, profound emptiness in her core, the absolute cessation of the intoxicating power she had relied upon. More devastatingly, the physical disguise failed. As the charm vanished, the smooth, porcelain perfection of her face did not return to its original human state. Instead, the features collapsed under the weight of the accumulated cost. The skin around her eyes seemed to dissolve, leaving the terrifying glass gaze exposed, and the lower half of her face distorted into a permanent, chilling rictus, resembling the pulpy, stripped horror she had glimpsed earlier. The beauty she had valued, the shield she had paid for, was gone, replaced by the complete, grotesque forfeiture demanded by the covenant. She was unrecognizable, even to herself. Ijeoma let out a silent, internal scream. She couldn't feel the sting of the public humiliation. All she felt was the terrifying cold of utter emptiness, and one single burning emotion: regret for the loss of Jide. The bargain, the fame, the money, it was all dust. She had broken the covenant, and the price was immediate and total. Ignoring the chaos, the flashing cameras, and Ngozi's high-pitched, hysterical laughter of triumph, Ijeoma turned and fled the runway. She did not stumble. The fear gave her a strange, gliding momentum. Her only goal was to reach Jide. He was the only piece of her true self that remained, the only hope of salvation from the pit of emptiness. She raced past the backstage crew, tearing the heavy gown from her body, leaving the useless, lifeless fabric pooled on the floor. She burst out of the back entrance of the exhibition hall, rushing toward the car park where she knew Jide would have left his vehicle. She called his name, her voice a harsh, scraping sound. She saw his distinct car and saw him. He was not running away. He was standing beside his vehicle, looking completely devastated, clutching his keys, prepared to leave but unable to move. "Jide," she rasped, running toward him, her ruined face exposed to the open night air, a monument to her greed and failure. She reached him, grabbing his arm with frantic, pleading desperation. "Jide, please. Look at me. Sorry. Broke the vow. I broke it for you." Jide turned to face her, his perceptive eyes fixed on the horrific, ruined landscape of her features. He didn't flinch away or scream. His expression was one of profound, agonizing pity. "Ijeoma," he whispered, his voice thick with sorrow, "the vow you broke was the spiritual one. But the one you broke to yourself, that is the one that killed you." He gently pulled his arm from her grasp, his touch conveying devastating finality. He was seeing the total loss of the woman he loved. Before she could plead further, the air around them grew thick and impossibly cold, the distinct metallic scent of ozone returning, heavier and more focused than ever before. The spiritual husband had arrived to collect the final debt.